All right, guys, we're going to start our notes on topic 2.1 by starting with 211 to 214. So when we take a look at our command terms of list and define, those are pretty straightforward and easy. Outline and explain get a little bit trickier. So we'll go ahead and we'll look at this diagram. You have a workbook packet, and I strongly encourage you to get it out because I'm going to ask you to cut and tape some diagrams into your actual notes. So take a moment and find that. All right, so if we look at this diagram, these two things show us the exact same process in different ways. So with this one here, we've got lungs, we've got your heart and blood, and you've got muscle. So the way that this diagram works is I like to start with our volume of oxygen that we breathe in. That comes in this way. That's inspired through the lungs. And if you think about how gears work, it then moves up here. So our flow of oxygen moves through the heart and into the blood, where it's eventually taken up by your muscle, and specifically the mitochondria, where the mitochondria then turns it into carbon dioxide, which will go back out through the heart and blood and eventually be expired or breathed out. So the general idea of this diagram is we're using what we know about cogs and wheels, and we're breathing in, we're moving the oxygen through the blood to the cells, where we then turn it into carbon dioxide, which flows back through the blood and the heart and eventually gets breathed out. Okay. So if you don't like that one, you can look at this one. It's a little bit simpler. We've got our oxygen. It comes in through our lungs. Okay. Our heart pumps it through to the muscles. The muscles then use it in cell respiration. That carbonated blood then goes back through the heart to the lungs, and it's breathed out. Okay, so both of these are showing the same thing, but that's the process that we're going to be looking at, is how do we breathe in and out. So this first learning target, list the structures. You have this diagram. I would encourage you to cut it out and put it into your notes. So there are a couple of things that are listed here that you don't see on the diagram, okay? So this entire thing right here, this is the trachea. When the trachea splits, it splits into right and left bronchi, okay? Bronchus is going to be the singular, bronchi is the plural, so that's what that is. If we look at bronchioles, those are just the smaller kind of divisions after that. So all of these are called bronchioles. What we don't see in the diagram are alveoli. Those are the individual little air sacs, and we'll show those again on the next, on a future slide. So now let's talk about the functions of the conducting pathways. When we say outline, remember what we're looking at is basically listing the general idea or steps, okay? So when we talk about the conducting pathways, okay, that is where air enters the body, okay? So when it's asking us that, it's basically asking what are the functions of the mouth, nose, pharynx, and larynx, because that's where air enters the body. That's where the air moves through. Okay, so in general, those four structures offer a low resistance. You can breathe in large amounts at a time. We have ways to protect ourselves against harmful substances, and it warms and moistens the air. Okay. But specifically, the nose, pharynx, and larynx have a few other specific jobs. The nose is specifically what humidifies and filters particles. The pharynx is where we have that low resistance path. It's basically a big tube. And the larynx additionally functions as the voice box. And this is what's going to protect us from food and fluids. So when you eat or drink, this is where we kind of move over. So we kind of close a flap so that you can swallow food and water without choking, without breathing it in. So moving on, okay, 213 asks you to define a whole bunch of words, okay? So for these words, what I want to do is just kind of go over some in general with you. This line right here, this is what you breathe when you're just sitting and relaxing, okay? So you're just sitting here taking some notes. That's your normal breath in and out, okay? When you then take a huge deep breath in, like that is your inspiratory reserve volume. So reserve meaning like you have extra. So how much extra air can we inhale, okay? Then you bring it back to your normal breathing. You then have extra that you can breathe out, okay? That's your expiratory reserve volume. So you can be breathing normally and then all of a sudden decide to exhale even more, okay? So when we take these and add them together from bottom here to top, we call that the inspiratory capacity. That's how much air we can physically fit into our lungs, all right? When we look from all the way at the top to all the way at the bottom, that's your vital capacity. That is how much air you can breathe in and out, okay? That's like the total, that's gonna be your biggest number, okay? This thing down here, the functional residual capacity, we're not really going to talk about that much, okay? But that is from the bottom of your tidal volume, okay? And then our total lung capacity is basically all the way from top to bottom. You'll notice, though, we don't often get down here to this yellow area, this residual volume. If you get like the wind knocked out of you or a punctured lung, that's the air that's leaving. But we don't typically access that air, it just stays, okay? So on the next slide, all I'm going to ask you to do is to copy down those definitions. Okay, so moving on, if you do not have your workbook, I need you to get it, and we're going to turn to the back page, the very, very last page of your workbook. For topic 214, we're going to talk about, or continuing 213, we're going to talk about how that graph, so we got our tidal volume, big things, how does that change with exercise? This is in your workbook on the very last page, and I would encourage you to cut it out and put it into your notes, okay? So when we talk about exercise, our tidal volume will increase. So instead of maybe breathing like this, you start to breathe heavier. So your tidal volume will increase. Because of that, the area above and below is going to decrease because you're already using some of that additional space, okay? When we exercise, believe it or not, our total lung capacity and vital capacity, those will both decrease just a little bit because as our muscles begin working harder, they take up a little bit more room. So this slight decrease is just because as our muscles of our lungs work and we pump extra blood to them, it takes up a little bit of volume. So what I want to do is real quick go back to this, all right? So once again, as I delete some of my lovely things here, once again, if we take a look at this graph, I'm going to make my blue pen, my green pen here when I exercise. So when I exercise, this is up and down a little bit more. So that inspiratory reserve volume, that's going to decrease because I'm taking up that room. And this down here, this will also decrease because we're taking up that room. All right, so moving back, okay, here's that again. So this quick demo I'm going to do with you guys in class. You can look it up, but what I want you to think about is this here is representing our lungs. This is representing our diaphragm. When you pull this down or release it, it's going to change the volume of air here. That'll make a lot more sense once we physically do it in class, all right? So just something to think about for now. All right, so finally we get into 214, explain the mechanics of ventilation in the lung. This basically is a how. Explain how we breathe. This is also copied for you, and I would suggest cutting it and putting it into your notes. Again, it's on the last page of your workbook. Okay, so when we can talk about this, okay, take a moment to read it. So IB is not going to ask you this question and expect you to regurgitate these 7 bullets. Instead, it's going to ask you kind of big picture. So one of the important things is the reason that air moves in and out of the lungs is because of pressure differences, okay? So your lungs are sacs that just sit there. When your diaphragm moves up and down and your chest, your ribs move in and out, it changes the pressure, okay? So when your diaphragm flattens and moves down, your rib cage moves upward, okay? This will increase the space and it will decrease the internal air pressure. That now makes air from the outside rush into your lungs. When we go to exhale, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles, or your rib muscles, move back to their resting position. It reduces the size and therefore increases the pressure and forces air out of the lungs, okay? So this is, it's not tricky once you see it happen. So if you're struggling a little bit thinking about this, I would suggest just maybe YouTubing a video or something like that, or maybe you can wait in class and we'll do that little balloon demo. But it all happens because of pressure differences. So what I want you to do, and this is the thing that I am going to look at, did you complete this? I want you to rewrite these IB targets, specifically just 214, in a different way. So there are all kinds of different like graphic organizers you can use. You can draw it like this one here. You can talk about it step by step like this one here. Maybe you put it into like a little circle diagram. I don't really care. But what I want you to do is to take this big old bit of information and do it somehow differently, all right? And this is a thing that I'm going to check for next class. Thank you, guys.